Damon Wilson with the Atlantic Council. First of all, I just wanted to thank you for your remarks. Thank you for your presence. I think it underscores the role that we can see Central Europe playing on the transatlantic agenda. And I think it's the administration deserves quite a bit of credit with your visit, building on the visits of Secretary Clinton, Vice President Biden, President Obama to the region. I wanted to pick up on a comment you made in your remarks about a Europe whole and free, which is a phrase that captured both the concept of vision, but also an actual policy. And I think while many folks recognize there's a lot of unfinished business to completing Europe, the way we go about thinking about this is not quite clear. There seems to be quite a strong consensus that over the long run, the Western Balkans will earn its place within the institutions of Europe. But as you look to the east, it gets a little bit more complicated. It's not quite clear that the process of EU-NATO integration backing up the vision of a Europe whole and free applies as neatly when we're thinking about the cases of Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, not to mention Belarus or Russia. And so I wanted to ask, is this old paradigm of a Europe whole and free driven by NATO and EU enlargement, is that paradigm over in some respects? Is it no longer the same applicable instrument tool that we've had in the past 20 years? And what essentially are our goals looking east to the new Eastern Europe, and how do we go about achieving them?
Well, thanks, David. There are obviously a lot of different dimensions to that question. I think it is an important commitment and one that we do need to remain both faithful to and serious about. But there are lots of elements of what allows us to achieve that vision. First of all, I do think it's critical, and I expect that NATO will reaffirm the open door policy at the Lisbon summit. I think that remains critical. We've made clear over the past several years that there are different paths to membership, but that door remains open. And as I said, we have to reaffirm the Istanbul principle that countries should be free to make the choices that they want to make about their own security arrangements. Second, obviously, the decision on EU and EU membership is a decision for EU members, and we recognize that there are multiple factors there, but there are important commitments that have been made, especially vis-a-vis Turkey, which I think are important to understand the deep significance of. And as Europe continues its own construction, to consider on an individualized basis the other potential applicants. But beyond those memberships, there are other factors as well. First, I think, and I hope I've made clear the importance that I attach to it, and I think our administration attaches to it, there is the complementary role of the OSCE, which is also another values-based institution that reflects the principles of Helsinki, of democracy and human rights, which is another element of our wholeness. And I think that's why we believe we do need to work hard to make that work. We've been very engaged, for example, in Kyrgyzstan. I don't think any of us believe in any time in the near future we're going to be discussing whether Kyrgyzstan should be a member of NATO or the EU, but we do have an interest in a democratic, stable, tolerant Kyrgyzstan that can both meet the needs of its people and not provide a source of insecurity in the region. And the OSCE is a critical vehicle for us to engage there, whether it's through a police presence or through its support for democracy building there. These are critical institutions that deal with the broader geography of our broader Europe and those values of wholeness and freedom. And finally, the initiatives like the Eastern Partnership Initiative, whether that leads to membership or not, are ways of supporting democracy, human rights, economic development in the neighboring countries, which is in our interest in this European and transatlantic construction, whether or not they become formal members of these other institutions. So I think that the commitment is there, the tools are there. There are multiple strategies that have to be tailored to the individual circumstances of the countries in question, but we need to maintain that sense, because I do believe that it's not just a values commitment to these countries, but also in our own interest. We've seen the values of stability and prosperity that come from making sure that the European space is inhabited by successful, prosperous, tolerant, democratic societies. And so we all have a deep stake in this, and we need to work in each individual case to figure out what the right path is and what the right future is.
Let me take one more question. I think we just have time for one more question.
Good morning. I'm Martin Swarovski. I'm from the Czech Embassy. Mr. Steinberg, speaking about relations with Russia, you mentioned here conventional forces treaty. This is a very important agenda, I think, and very lasting agenda. Could you more elaborate on it? Do you see there are really progress in this agenda?
And because this is the last question, let me pile one on.
Okay,
And I realize this has you have a very short time, so but we should touch on this briefly. And that is the question of democracy assistance. And since Russia came up, how do you balance these two things, the desire to engage more closely with non-democratic or not fully democratic countries, and the ability to work together, particularly with Central Europeans, on democracy assistance throughout the world?
Well, I think on CFE, I think we all recognize that there's a continued need to adapt the CFE or the issue of conventional forces and security in Europe and in Europe's periphery to the realities of the modern political landscape. And we're all, I think, collectively prepared to do that. There are a lot of different ideas out there, but a lot of them require a willingness by our partner in Russia to take this exercise seriously and to do it consistent with the basic values and principles that I've discussed before. We've together, between the United States and Europe, been developing and exploring ideas for how to take that process forward. We've presented some ideas to Russia. I think the door and the question is still open as to whether Russia is prepared to deal with that. We clearly have a fundamental problem, particularly with respect to stationing of troops outside of the country, that needs to be addressed. But I think there is an opportunity that would benefit everyone. The Russians say that's something that they would like to do as well. And I think we have a common commitment to show that we're prepared to undertake those explorations, but it has to be consistent with the security of our members and the principles that we believe in. On democracy, Fred, as you know, the President spoke quite extensively about this in his UN General Assembly speech just a few weeks ago, and this remains critical to us, that we understand that both because of who we are and because of what we believe in, that the United States needs to stand on the side of democracy and to work with those who are trying to establish democracy in places where it is not firmly rooted or where it's not rooted at all. We recognize that there is no single solution to it. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. But at the same time, it is a critical and central part of our own agenda. And it is always more effective when we do it in partnership with others. Because, frankly, we understand as the world's dominant power that there's a different quality to it when it comes solely from the United States. And it does, unfortunately, in some cases, allow the adversaries to try to categorize our agenda as being other than the values-based agenda that we have. But when we're supported by partners who share those values, like Central Europeans, like Europeans, but also like Asian democracies or African democracies, then our legitimacy, our credibility is even stronger. That's why the Secretary and I both put such an importance on the community of democracies and why she came here, because she believes very strongly that this is the kind of vehicle that gives credibility to that effort and demonstrates that this is not one civilization against another, but reflects universal values in the UN Charter and something that all people aspire to. And I have to say, as I travel around the world, I am convinced that this is a critical part of our agenda. I was in Mongolia a few months ago, and I believe very firmly that if the people of Mongolia can choose and work hard to build a democracy there, demonstrates that this is a universal good and something that benefits people everywhere. And so we can't be shy about our conviction about that and do it in a way that is not designed to threaten, but also to make clear that we do think it's critical to the future.